When a racist couple harasses a black Navy SEAL over a parking spot, they learn that real power isn't about privilege, it's about principle. 7 minutes of entitlement costs them a lifetime of consequences. As we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you believe that everyone should be treated with respect regardless of their status or looks. Welcome to Mr. Black's Stories. Marcus Johnson's reflection stared back at him in the rearview mirror as he adjusted it slightly. 12 years as a Navy SEAL had left their mark, not just in the faint scar above his right eyebrow or the disciplined posture he maintained even while driving, but in the watchful calm that never quite left his eyes. The mall parking lot was packed for the weekend sale, cars circling like sharks. Marcus had been patient, waiting his turn, following the unspoken rules of parking lot etiquette. When an elderly couple finally pulled out of a spot near the entrance, Marcus signaled and began to pull in. That's when he heard the blaring horn. A silver Range Rover cut across the lane, attempting to swoop into the same spot from the opposite direction. Marcus had already begun turning in, his front bumper clearly establishing his claim to the space. He continued his maneuver, parking perfectly between the lines, and switched off the engine. In his side mirror, he watched as the Range Rover stopped at an awkward angle, blocking part of the driving lane. The driver's door flew open, and a woman emerged, designer handbags swinging from her forearm, face already contorted with indignation. Marcus took a deep breath before opening his door. Some confrontations couldn't be avoided, but they could be managed. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone unaccustomed to being denied. "I was clearly waiting for that spot." Marcus stepped out of his car, his movements deliberate and calm. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I had my turn signal on and was already turning in." "Don't you ma'am me," she retorted, stepping closer. "I've been circling this lot for 20 minutes. You just came along and stole my spot." Her name was Diane Harrington, though Marcus wouldn't learn that until later. In her mid-40s with highlighted blonde hair styled in an expensive cut, she wore the kind of casual luxury that communicated wealth without trying. Or at least, that was the intention. "I understand parking can be frustrating," Marcus offered, maintaining his composure. "There are several spots opening up over in the next row." Diane's eyes narrowed as she assessed him. His calm demeanor, his athletic build, the military precision with which he carried himself, and something in her expression shifted. Her gaze traveled from his face to his car, then back again, her lips curling slightly. "That's not the point," she said, her voice taking on a new edge. "The point is consideration. Some of us were raised with manners." The implication hung in the air. "I understand," Marcus said, reaching for his wallet in his back pocket. "I need to get going, but I hope you find a spot soon." He turned to walk away, a tactical retreat from a pointless confrontation. "Typical," Diane muttered, just loud enough to ensure he heard it. "They let anyone have nice things these days, don't they? Even when they don't know how to behave properly." Marcus paused. He could have kept walking, should have perhaps, but something in her tone made him turn back. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said, confidence bolstered by his attention. "I'm just saying, there was a time when people knew their place in society." A young couple walking nearby slowed their pace, the woman already reaching for her phone. "And what place would that be?" Marcus asked, his voice still controlled but carrying a new weight. Diane smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. The kind of place where you wouldn't be driving a car like that or thinking you can just take whatever you want. "Ma'am," Marcus said carefully, "I earned everything I have. I served this country for 12 years as a Navy SEAL." Something flickered across Diane's face, perhaps a moment of reconsideration, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Instead, she laughed, the sound brittle and dismissive. "Oh, please. The military, that's your claim to respectability? Fighting in pointless wars and expecting everyone to worship you for it?" The bystanders who had slowed were now openly watching, phones raised to record the escalating encounter. "I'm going to walk away now," Marcus said, turning once more. "That's right, walk away," Diane called after him. Typical. Acting all entitled and then playing the victim when called out. Marcus continued toward the mall entrance, his jaw tight but his steps measured. He had nothing to prove to this woman. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Diane's voice rose, frustration evident in her tone. When Marcus didn't respond, she stepped forward quickly, her hand shooting out to grab his arm. "Don't you dare ignore me," she hissed, nails digging into his sleeve. If you believe in accountability and justice, hit subscribe for more stories that will make you stand up and cheer. Marcus stopped, looking pointedly at her hand until she removed it. "Ma'am, please don't ever put your hands on me." "Or what?" she challenged, stepping even closer, emboldened by his restraint. "What are you gonna do about it, tough guy? Call your little military friends." More people had gathered now, a small semicircle of onlookers drawn by the confrontation. Most had phones out, recording the exchange. Marcus maintained his composure. "There's no need for this to escalate. We're arguing over a parking spot." "We're not arguing over a parking spot," Diane corrected, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "We're establishing who belongs where, and you clearly don't understand your position." Before Marcus could respond, a new voice entered the fray. "Is there a problem here?" A tall man in an expensive polo shirt approached, his face flushed with anger. Richard Harrington, Diane's husband, had arrived, alerted by a text from his wife. "Yes, there's a problem," Diane said immediately, her voice shifting to something more fragile. This man took my parking spot and then started threatening me when I called him out on it." Richard stepped between them, squaring his shoulders as he faced Marcus. "Is that right? You threatening my wife?" "Sir, that's not what happened," Marcus explained calmly. "I parked in an open spot. Your wife approached me upset about it. I suggested other available spots and things escalated from there." "He's lying," Diane insisted, her hand clutching Richard's arm. "He was aggressive from the start. You know how they can be." The "they" hung in the air, unmistakable in its implication. Richard's face hardened. "Listen, buddy, I don't know who you think you are. I'm someone who's trying to avoid an unnecessary confrontation," Marcus interrupted, his patience thinning but still intact. "This entire situation is being recorded by security cameras and at least half a dozen phones. Your wife approached me, made racially charged comments, and put her hands on me. I've remained calm throughout." Richard glanced around, noticing the crowd for the first time. His expression wavered briefly before doubling down. "You think I care about some videos? Do you know who I am in this community? I'm Richard Harrington. I've got friends in the police department, the mayor's office." "Rich," Diane cut in, her voice taking on a new urgency. "He said he's military, some kind of special forces." Richard scoffed. "Navy SEAL? You expect me to believe that? What, they're letting anyone in these days?" Marcus had endured enough. "Sir, I've remained respectful despite your wife's behavior. I'm going to continue into the mall now. I suggest you both do the same, but in a different direction." He turned once more, and this time Richard grabbed his shoulder roughly. "Don't you walk away when I'm talking to you." What happened next occurred in a blur. Marcus, operating on instinct and training, pivoted smoothly while removing Richard's hand from his shoulder with a controlled movement. He didn't strike, didn't attack, simply created distance and established a defensive position. Richard, unprepared for the swift response, stumbled backward, his ego more bruised than his body, his face contorted with rage. "You put your hands on me?" he shouted, regaining his balance. "You're going to regret that." He lunged forward, swinging wildly. Marcus sidestepped easily, allowing Richard's momentum to carry him past. The older man stumbled again, nearly falling before catching himself. Diane screamed, the sound piercing and theatrical. "Stop him! He's attacking my husband!" Richard turned and charged again, this time with more determination. Marcus, still operating with restraint, blocked the incoming punch and redirected Richard's energy, causing him to spin off balance. "Sir, I don't want to hurt you," Marcus warned, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Please stop." But Richard was beyond reason now, humiliation fueling his rage. He reached down and grabbed a shopping bag someone had dropped in the commotion, swinging it like a weapon toward Marcus's head. This time, Marcus was forced to act. With precision developed through years of training, he struck once, a controlled blow to Richard's solar plexus that dropped the man to his knees, gasping for air. Diane's screams reached a new pitch. "Help, security! He's killing my husband." If you're enjoying this story, like and subscribe now to the channel to find out how this story ends. Mall security arrived within moments, pushing through the gathered crowd. 2 guards approached cautiously, taking in the scene. Richard kneeling on the ground, struggling to breathe, Diane wailing dramatically beside him, and Marcus standing calmly with his hands visible. "What's going on here?" the lead guard demanded. "This man attacked my husband," Diane cried, pointing accusingly at Marcus. "For no reason. We were just walking to our car." "That's not what happened," called a voice from the crowd. A young woman stepped forward, phone in hand. "I've got the whole thing on video. They've been harassing him from the moment he parked his car." "She's lying," Diane shouted. "We're respected members of this community. He's the aggressor." More voices joined in, multiple witnesses confirming what the video showed. Security radioed for police assistance while attempting to maintain order. Richard had recovered enough to stand, though he remained hunched over. "You're finished," he wheezed at Marcus, hatred burning in his eyes. "Do you have any idea who we are? By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never come back from whatever third-world hellhole you were in." Marcus simply shook his head. "Sir, every word you're saying is being recorded." "Like I care?" Richard spat. "Who do you think people will believe, you or us?" The police arrived exactly 7 minutes after Diane had first put her hands on Marcus. 2 officers approached, already briefed by security about the situation. "Officers, thank God!" Diane exclaimed, rushing toward them. "This man assaulted my husband. We want him arrested immediately." The lead officer, a veteran with a weathered face, held up a hand. "Ma'am, please step back. We need to sort this out." "What's there to sort out?" Richard demanded, his breathing still labored. "He attacked me. Look at me." "Sir, we have multiple witnesses and videos that suggest otherwise," the officer replied calmly. "I'm going to need statements from everyone involved." Security pulled the officers aside, showing them footage from the mall cameras. Several bystanders approached as well, offering their recordings as evidence. As the officers reviewed the material, their expressions hardened. They conferred briefly before approaching the Harringtons. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington," the lead officer began, "based on security footage and witness statements, you both appear to be the primary aggressors in this incident." "That's ridiculous," Diane protested. "We're the victims here." "Ma'am, we have clear video of you making racially charged statements, initiating physical contact, and your husband attempting to assault this gentleman. Given the nature of some of your comments, the district attorney may consider enhanced charges." The color drained from Diane's face. "Enhanced charges? What are you talking about?" "Hate crime, ma'am." Richard stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from aggressive to condescending. "Officer, clearly there's been a misunderstanding. I'm sure we can resolve this without any formal charges. I'm good friends with Chief Peterson." The officer's expression didn't change. "Sir, I'm placing you both under arrest for assault, disorderly conduct, and making false statements to police officers. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers led the Harringtons to separate patrol cars, the reality of their situation finally seemed to sink in. Diane's theatrical sobs gave way to genuine panic, while Richard's blustering confidence crumbled into stunned silence. Marcus watched without satisfaction or anger, just the quiet certainty that justice was being served. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like and subscribe to the channel for more contents like this. 3 months later, Marcus sat in a courtroom watching as the judge delivered the verdict. The Harringtons' case had attracted significant media attention, particularly after the videos went viral. Their attempts to paint themselves as victims had backfired spectacularly when additional witnesses came forward with stories of similar behavior in the past. In the case of State versus Richard and Diane Harrington, the judge announced, "This court finds the defendants guilty on all counts." Richard sat motionless at the defense table, his once imposing presence diminished by the proceedings. Diane dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though her tears had long since lost their persuasive power. "Given the premeditated nature of your actions and your continued refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing," the judge continued, "this court sentences you to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. You will also be required to complete 500 hours of community service and undergo mandatory sensitivity training." The civil lawsuit had already been settled out of court, a substantial sum that Marcus had donated to organizations supporting veterans' mental health services. As court adjourned and the Harringtons were led away, their attorney approached Marcus. "My clients have authorized me to offer a formal apology," he began awkwardly. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not interested in apologies made under legal duress. What they need isn't my forgiveness. It's self-reflection." Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, asking for his reaction to the verdict. "I didn't ask for any of this," Marcus said simply. "I parked my car and was confronted because someone decided I didn't belong there. The only lesson here is that actions have consequences, regardless of who you think you are." As he walked away from the cameras, a text message appeared on his phone from his former commanding officer, handled like a true SEAL, "With restraint until there's no other option, then with decisive action. Proud of you, brother." Marcus smiled slightly as he pocketed his phone. The Harringtons had entered that parking lot, believing they were untouchable, that their privilege would shield them from consequences. They had learned otherwise, and the lesson had cost them everything. Marcus Johnson had mastered patience long before he became a Navy SEAL. That day in the parking lot, the world had witnessed the other side of his training. What happened when someone pushed too far and karma delivered swift, unstoppable justice? Have you ever witnessed someone underestimating the wrong person? Share your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button and stick around for more stories of perseverance and success.